Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I have got a very special guest. I think probably the most special guest that we've ever had on our show, and I'm very excited for this interview. We've obviously covered the Sahel States, specifically Burkina Faso, quite a bit, and their history on our program. Joining me today is the Foreign Minister of Burkina Faso, Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré, who was appointed in December 2023 with a background in regional cooperation and diplomacy. Now the foreign minister of the great state of Burkina Faso. Mr. Traoré, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Je vais très bien. Merci beaucoup.
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to join you.
It is a pleasure to join you this morning.
How has the living situation for the people of Burkina Faso, for Burkinabes, how has it improved under the government of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president?
Très bien, merci. Je pense que c'est une question
Very well,
qui
thank you.
m'amène à évoquer
This is a question that brings me to describe the current national context. I have to say that since Captain Ibrahim Traoré came to power, hope has returned. Hope is back because the whole world has no idea what Burkina Faso was like at one time. We had an army that was totally destitute. Before, soldiers were pooling their rifles, 4 soldiers per 1 rifle, and meanwhile, the terrorists were taking over the country, almost half of which was already occupied.
leurs fusils, 4 soldats pour un fusil, et que pendant ce temps, il y a
Before, the army was totally out of ammunition, and today, the victories of our army are a testament to the fact that Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done a job that corresponds to a need, a demand that the people of Burkina Faso have been putting forward for a long time. So, in fact, in his vision and in his actions, he corresponds to the aspirations that the people of Burkina Faso have been harboring ever since.
Que les populations de Burkina Faso portaient depuis. Donc, il est en fait dans sa vision et dans ses actions.
What are these aspirations?
Il correspond
They are to restore
aux
security,
aspirations
to relaunch local economies, to establish new governance, and to ensure that those who have been long remaining on the margins of growth can benefit from it.
C'est d'instaurer une nouvelle gouvernance et c'est de faire en sorte que ceux qui sont restés longtemps en marge des produits de la croissance puissent en être bénéficiaires. Et aujourd'hui, la vision du capitaine
And today,
Traoré
Captain Traoré's vision
est une vision
embodies
qui
all
incarne
these
toutes ces
aspirations.
aspirations.
And
Et c'est
that's
pour
why you
cela
have a certain communion between the
vous avez
people
une
and the
certaine
government's
communion
team
entre
today.
les populations
The army has
et
been rehabilitated,
l'équipe
the
de
army has been
gouvernance
re-equipped,
aujourd'hui.
the army has regained its morale to go on the
L'armée a
offensive,
été équipée.
and a country that was
L'armée
half
a
occupied
retrouvé le
is
moral
now in the
pour aller à
process of
l'offensive.
recovering its entire
Et
territory,
un pays
with
qui
over
était à moitié
71% of it
est
covered by the
aujourd'hui en train
military.
de retrouver l'entièreté de son territoire avec plus de 71% du territoire qui a été recouvert par les militaires. Et pendant que les soldats sont en train de faire la guerre,
And while the soldiers are waging war, development policies are being launched. The presidential initiative FASO-MEBO, which is an urban reconstruction initiative, for example. On the agricultural front, there's also a lot of work being done to enable farmers to resume their regular activities. So I'd say that today, morale is back in Burkina Faso. Hope is back in Burkina Faso.
L'espoir et l'espérance sont de retour au Burkina Faso.
What major steps is Burkina Faso taking right now, possibly nationalization of certain industries, to further achieve sovereignty in your economy? As you have broken away from the West, what roles is your country taking to, pave this path towards independence moving forward?
Le capitaine Traoré a compris que la vraie indépendance passe d'abord par une réappropriation.
Captain Traoré understood that true independence comes first and foremost through the reappropriation of our country, which is supported by real sovereignty. We were a country that always needed to take advice here and there to be able to act, to submit its projects for approval before implementing them. In other words, to carry out the wishes of other players and other political actors.
La dynamique aujourd'hui, c'est d'abord une dynamique de reprise en main. La reprise en main du territoire, la reprise en main des ressources.
Today's dynamic is first and foremost one of taking back control of the territory, taking back control of resources, taking back control of public policies, everything that can enable us to think, choose, plan and implement according to our own perspectives and our own objectives. So, the question of nationalization, as presented by some of the press, doesn't really correspond to reality.
Nous étions dans un pays où les ressources étaient séquestrés et pris en otage par des acteurs qui exploitaient.
What is it really about? We were in a country where resources were sequestered and held hostage by players and agents who exploited them without regard for the needs of the people. Today, it is about restoring justice. A justice that wants the countries and areas where these resources are located to benefit Burkina Faso first. I like to joke that it's important for people to know that when we say that Burkina Faso's gold shines abroad, that we ourselves see that golden sheen in the eyes of the children from the gold mining villages. There's no question of Burkinabe gold being famous on the international market, and children in these villages where this gold is mined are not going to school, living in poverty, and women not having access to drinking water. So that's what it comes down to. The nationalization policy currently underway is a policy driven by this vision, to ensure that those who live with the resources can benefit from them, can find their share in them in terms of fulfillment. And that's why the entire mining policy has been reviewed, with the interests of the local population now placed at its heart. Because that's Captain Ibrahim Traoré's primary vision. The main indicator is the level of satisfaction of the people of Burkina Faso, the people of the Sahel, the people of Africa.
Burkinabé, des populations sahéliennes, des populations africaines.
What role do you believe Western states are playing in the backing, funding, possibly arming of jihadist forces in your country and more broadly in the Sahel region as these groups attempt to destabilize your revolutionary governments?
Alors, nous sommes animés de plusieurs questions. Il faut d'abord comprendre que quand on regarde l'histoire du terrorisme,
we're driven by several questions. First of all, you have to understand that when you look at the history of terrorism in the sub-region, it all started in Mali, then in Niger, and then in Burkina Faso, and nobody saw it coming. From one day to the next, it continued exploding, and we realized that we are faced with a situation, one, that we don't know anything about, two, that we don't know who's behind it in the first place, and three, which leads us to the following questions. For example, where do all these weapons come from? When were these people trained to make explosive devices with ammonium nitrate to attack military positions with sophisticated weapons? When were these weapons delivered? Where do these people get the money to recruit young people?
J'étais à l'époque dans une organisation et à une conférence, il y a une ONG qui avait fait un sondage à l'époque au Mali.
You know, at the time, I was in an organization and at a conference, an NGO that did a survey in Mali to find out what motivated young people to join terrorist groups. 90% of young people went there to earn money. So, they arrive, it's terrorist organizations that come and that had almost become the second largest recruiter after the United States in our countries. So, we said to ourselves, from the moment the weapons aren't manufactured in Burkina Faso, Mali or Niger, from the moment we don't produce the ammunition, and from one day to the next, thousands of people turn up armed with ammunition and money, there are bound to be people behind it.
Naturellement, la première accusation, c'est les pays qui fabriquent ces armes, ces munitions.
And who could be behind it? Naturally, the first accusation is the country that manufactures these weapons and ammunition. Today, people want us to address the situation of insecurity in the Sahel region without mentioning Libya. But who destroyed Libya? It was the West that destroyed Libya. And the destruction of Libya was the starting point for the spread of thousands of weapons that arrived in our villages and are now being used to kill people in the Sahel region. I see superfluous reports that some people present saying that terrorists get their supplies from army endowments. But this is not true. Where did the first weapons come from? Where did the first weapons come from? It's a legitimate question to be asked, and that's why we're saying that the destabilization of our countries here is nothing more than an instrument for initiating a new colonization process.
What does the recent deal that was signed by Russia's Rosatom with Burkina Faso mean for the future of Burkina Faso's ability to further develop its economic interests, its manufacturing, as Burkina Faso hopes to bring peaceful civilian nuclear technology to the country?
Il y a quelque chose qu'il faut que l'Occident comprenne. L'Afrique de 2025, ce n'est pas l'Afrique de 1960.
There's something the West needs to understand. The Africa of 2025 is not the Africa of 1960. An African of 2025 is not an African from 1960. Now we have expertise, we have intelligence, we have capacities. What we lacked was the freedom to act. What we lacked was the appropriate funding, which was being held hostage by certain international players.
C'est le continent des alternatives, des solutions, c'est le continent de demain, comme le dit tout le monde. Alors,
today, Africa is the continent of alternatives, of solutions. It's the continent of possibilities, as everyone says. So, what Russia dared to do, what the West didn't want to do, and it's exactly the same thing that a country like China dared to do, is, first of all, believe in the abilities of African people. In other words, these people can now be considered our partners. From the moment you enter a partnership, it changes the way you look at all the things around you. So, it's no longer a question of dominating and being dominated, but it is of people sitting down to talk. Russia has won this battle.
Ce challenge a été gagné par la Russie. Deuxièmement, c'est de dire.
Secondly, when we trust you, when we consider you as partners, we can discuss projects because we know you have the capacity to do so, or in any case, you can mobilize the resources and capabilities to do so, which is something the West was very unwilling to do. This has enabled our countries to restructure their armies, re-equip them, and rethink our entire war policy. From an economic point of view, it's really the same logic. For example, France has been exploiting Nigeria's uranium in total ignorance of the reports coming in. The average Nigerian doesn't know how much France buys in their uranium. But they've been there for years, they are the owners. They've even bought sites for reserves that they don't exploit in a country where only 1 child in 6 goes to school. Uranium, on the other hand, makes Nigeria's uranium light up. And thanks to this uranium, at least 1 light bulb in 4 is lit in Western countries.
Sur 6 qui va à l'école. Par contre, l'uranium fait allumer l'uranium du Niger et grâce à cet uranium, au moins 1 ampoule sur 4 est allumée dans les pays occidentaux. Donc, quand vous êtes dans des rapports comme ça pendant
So when you've been in a relationship like that for years, and then you have a partner like Russia or China that come along and make you an offer, they let you breathe, you immediately see the difference. And today, the new relations we have with Russia are not new relations of dominating or being dominated, but new relations of partnership, which are individualized precisely by the fact that they are aligned with our own priorities. They make us an offer, we evaluate it, we accept it or we don't accept it. We think together, we build together, and we move forward together. Let's take a look at the nuclear sector, for example. For years, this has been presented as a sector in which African countries are practically, shall we say, protected from working with it, because it's something reserved for the crème de la crème of the developed world. So yes, in other words, access to nuclear energy has been possible because certain international partners wanted it to be. Russia wanted it, and that's why African countries today are motivated and have the capacity to do it. They can do it. Because how many African countries produce uranium? A lot. In other words, today's new relations with Russia are organized around principles that highlight African capabilities, inner continent capabilities.
What role does the Alliance for Sahel States, the AES, play in building a Pan-African vision for the future? And are you hopeful that there will be other African states that eventually join AES in the future and unite with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali?
Merci. Il faut d'abord comprendre que l'histoire de l'Alliance des États du Sahel, c'est parti de preuves.
Thank you. First of all, it's important to understand that the history of the Alliance of Sahel States is a story of hardship. For years, 3 countries have been calling for help in the fight against insecurity and terrorism, but the whole world has decided to turn a blind eye. What's more, they have often used these countries in order to attract funding, for example, within the framework of the G5 Sahel or for other purposes. These 3 countries have been sounding the alarm for a very long time, saying that it's not just the Sahel that's under threat today, but the whole of West Africa. But they were not heard and they were not understood. Worse still, they've been ejected from organizations where solidarity should have been organized to support them in the first place. The Alliance of Sahel States is a wake-up call. A wake-up call organized on the basis of a people's conscience, which is that we have capacities, we need to be aware of them, and we have to stick together. It's the only surefire way out. From that moment on, we understood that we had to break certain ties to move away from non-African countries, to concentrate on our own inner continent capacities, to organize our own defense.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons atteint le niveau de structuration de la Confédération.
And today, we have reached the level of structuring of a, you could say, confederation, which every day demands that a new Africa is possible, which can start from a nucleus that is today the nucleus of the Sahel Confederation. And this core, this nucleus, it's not closed. All countries aspiring to true sovereignty and independence can join the fight, so that tomorrow's chained Africa is a free Africa, a prosperous Africa, a peaceful Africa. That's what the Alliance of Sahel States is all about. And this is what the 3 heads of state, Captain Traoré, General Goïta, and General Tiani, are working towards every day. Never before in the history of Africa have heads of states spoken to each other on a daily basis, discussed, shared, exchanged, and advised each other. This is what Africa needs. Today, when you look at what most heads of state do, it's denigrate themselves, exclude themselves, build walls between peoples. And yet, we have people who are ahead of the game, who are united. In Burkina Faso today, in Côte d'Ivoire, an Ivorian in Burkina Faso today is a Burkinabe. And it's the same between Burkina, Ghana, Burkina in Mali, for example. This dynamic is a source of wealth, a foundation on which the new Africa must be built. Unfortunately, politicians have not understood this. They are in the process of devising speeches and policies that continue to build useless walls between populations who only aspire to live together.
What steps is Burkina Faso taking right now to decolonize the minds of the Burkinabe people? Because with so many years under this neo-colonial Western dictatorship, I'd imagine that many people, despite the knowledge of what the French were doing and what the United States is doing, there still are steps that need to be taken to decolonize culture in everyone's minds. What steps are they taking right now?
Nous avons pris conscience que pour réussir la vraie souveraineté, il faut effectivement reconstruire les mentalités.
We've realized that to achieve true sovereignty, we need to rebuild mentalities. And when you look at our public policies, the first step is to take a number of measures that may seem insignificant, but still operate at a major scale. The first measure is a culture of self-acceptance. We do have limits, yes, and that's what President Traoré said. We need to be aware of that, but we do have abilities. We need to make the most of them. These abilities are our language and our cultures. And today, everything that's being done to build a good foundation starts with that. And that's why, when you look even at the three countries I have just mentioned, we came back to upgrade our language, to upgrade our cultures. The Day of Customs and Traditions in Mali and other similar events are in fact driven by this spirit. Because, first and foremost, we are Africans. We are Burkinabe. And it's this culture that must henceforth be carried forward and that must organize all other public policies, must influence that. So, the decolonization that is the most difficult and is precisely that which consists in working on mentalities. Burkina Faso today is proud of its country. And why is that? It's proud of its country because there's a leadership that expresses itself and that leads it to say, we're a capable country just like any other. We can do anything here in Burkina Faso. We don't need to imagine our future through another country which is a colonizing country. We have the opportunity to build a Burkina Faso and Africa where Africans are proud to stay and where they can have it all. So today, we're engaged in this cultural dynamic of mental decolonization to try and curb intellectuals living in the country en masse. Because we often talk about economic exports, but what people don't talk about, what makes us pay the most significant price, is mental exports. And that's what we're working on in the three countries, to get young Burkinabe into schools, in maternity wards and nursery schools, in primary schools, so that children become aware and accept their country and build a new Burkinabe citizenship and new African citizenship.
Et construire une nouvelle citoyenneté burkinabé, une nouvelle citoyenneté africaine.
And one last question for you. Thank you so much for your time. As I understand, there's been well over a dozen assassination attempts against President Ibrahim Traoré. And God bless that he is still with us. God bless his security. Who do you believe is behind these attacks? And why do you think they're doing this? What threat does a sovereign Burkina Faso represent?
Merci pour les bénédictions d'abord, et nous espérons l'avoir encore pour de longues années.
Thank you for your blessings first of all, and we do hope that he survives for many years to come. We believe that the awareness that Captain Traoré triggered and the drive to develop African capacities that he initiated threatened the interests of the countries that used to exploit us. And today, we are convinced that behind the situation of insecurity lies the protection of the interests of said countries. Because, you see, the more unstable we are, the more vulnerable and fragile we are, the more they will always be able to achieve their goals. So, we're not surprised by these assassination attempts because we've been there. Burkina Faso knew Sankara. The Sankara phenomenon was the same dynamic, and we had embarked on an African development course driven by a clear vision of a visionary head of state. When Sankara was assassinated, all prospects were put on hold and we fell back to even a lower level. Today, there's a resurgence with the same spirit, with identical leadership, with a population that's increasingly on board, and the fear that this phenomenon will spread throughout Africa, that Africans will take back control of their own development, naturally threatens survival of other international players outside our countries.
D'autres acteurs qui sont hors du pays. Donc, je ne saurais nommer ceux qui sont derrière les tentatives d'assassinat. Par contre, ce que je peux dire, c'est que
So I can't name those behind the assassination attempts. What I can say, however, is that as long as industrialization continues to develop in our countries, there will be the problem of supplying raw materials to other industries outside African countries. And it's these people who are working to put the brakes on our country's development agendas. Because a developed, self-sufficient Africa means Western countries with supply problems. Unfortunately, these countries should understand that it's now or never, that they have to rethink their contributions so that we can move towards partnerships. That's what China has done. And I've often said to certain other players that the Chinese, when they come to you, even when you don't have any capacities to be a partner to them, they create that capacity to make you partners. That's the only way that they can continue. But on the other hand, they want to confine you and force you to always stay at the level you can't go beyond, because you have to keep on providing so that others can live. I'm talking about Western countries right now. But these are not the commitments we made at the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations is based on shared universal values of peace, development, and tranquility. But today, in practice, indeed, we want peace and quiet to be for the developed countries, while the other countries continue to beg.
Dans la mendicité. Donc, je pense que nous sommes, comme j'aime le dire, dans une dictature des démocraties.
So, I think we are, as I like to say, in a dictatorship of democracy. The dictatorship of democracy, for me, is the one that wants us to turn a blind eye to the death of a child in Palestine and for everyone to stand up when there's an attack in a developed country. Is this dictatorship of democracy that wants us to accept that Ukraine should postpone its elections because they're at war, and that in Sahel countries we force them to organize elections because that's the way it is, that's the way you have to do it? This dictatorship of democracy is the one that wants Sahelian countries to keep quiet even when their own resources are being exploited, being plundered, because that's the norm, and Western countries can all but afford it. We've seen countries tear up conventional documents at the United Nations, and we want everyone to accept it, that this is happening. Coming from an African country, this is not possible. So this dictatorship of democracy must come to an end and give way to all countries aspiring to development. It's the only way to save the world. It's the only way to leave future generations a world of peace, a world of tranquility.
Foreign Minister Jean-Marie Traoré, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for inspiring me and many, many other people. We all are really rooting for Burkina Faso and for the Sahel States and your revolutionary governments and people. So I wish you nothing but the best, and God bless Burkina Faso. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.